Fawning, pleasing, helping, saving on the spiritual path. Hello, this is Chris speaking, Shores of Infinity, with a video about fawning on the spiritual path. For many years it has been taught that the main trauma responses are fight, flight and freeze. Most people don't fight or fly though. They freeze or they fawn, the fourth trauma response. What is fawning? Fawning is to supplicate, to please, to try to ameliorate, to appease, to conciliate, to placate, to make peace, to mediate. Why is that a trauma response? Because usually the first few times we get into a trauma, we're feeling helpless and defenseless. And we cannot run away, we cannot fight back, because we're fighting giants or groups of enemies. So the only two responses left are to freeze and let our mind escape and our body suffer alone, or to fawn. So probably fawning is the most common trauma reflex of all. While to freeze and then to dissociate is the last resort. So what does this have to do with the spiritual path, with spirituality? Well, it can have to do a lot with spirituality, because in later years, when you're adult and fawning is your main trauma response, there is a tendency to become a people pleaser, to have helper syndrome, savior complex, or codependency. Of course, there are psychological predispositions, like the Enneagram, for example, where this is even exaggerated. But you don't have to be a helper in any kind of psychological system to have helper syndrome or codependency. And anyone who has ever done the Landmark Forum, for example, maybe many years ago, knows that people pleasing is one of the major topics of everyone. And it often works too. People pleasing works. But you're leaving your place. If you're helping others, if you please others, you're leaving your space and place and position and moving towards someone else. But your position is empty. Same goes for codependency. Codependency also usually develops out of a sick relationship you got used to during your childhood. Be it a violent father or a sick mother you had to care for, something like this. Or again, it can be another form of people pleasing and fawning that you just found out at some point, more or less unconsciously, that it works. It works because it avoids conflict. It's shying away from conflict. So you're not setting your boundaries. You haven't learned how to say no. And you think if you support people, they will not harm you and they will get better. If there's a thought like that in your mind, please look a little deeper if that has really ever worked. Probably not very well. Plus, it's very, very exhausting. If you have your attention all the time on other people and assume that the shit hits the fan any time, and it's your job to make sure it doesn't, it's really exhausting. You're in full adrenaline all the time. You're in fear mode all the time. You're in trauma response mode all the time. There was a new Eckhart Tolle video recently called "Am I Ready to Help Others?" And this goes in the same vein. Are you ready to help others? There is this tendency on the spiritual path. Once you notice that you're ahead of the majority internally, spiritually, there is the tendency of most spiritual seekers not only to seek on, but also to help others. And here it serves you well to have a deep look what the motivation is, what your motivation is to help others. Now, I've heard other people calling it helper syndrome or savior complex. These are most probably results of fawning during your childhood. So not only is it not altruistic and without identification, but it is also digging deeper into your trauma without healing it. You're reinforcing your trauma. You're confirming your trauma instead of healing it. And healing it you must. It's part of Spiral Dynamics Coral. Before enlightenment is possible, you must heal your traumata. You must be able to defend yourself, to say no, to fight back, to fight or flight. No more freezing, no more fawning. No more automatic people pleasing. You can do what Carlos Castaneda calls stalking, to pretend, because it's part of society rules. If you do that on purpose, it's fine, but if it's an automatic response and you feel compelled to do this, you cannot do otherwise, then you have to work on that. Because, now the main point of this video comes, if you have this fawning ingrained in your psyche, then the probability that you're doing some sort of spiritual bypassing is enormous. Why? Fawning is a reaction to feeling helpless, defenseless, overwhelmed, attacked, without any chance of survival. Threatened by monsters and giants. Yeah? Your parents or whoever you grew up with were giants when you were small. Some asshole or uncle or whatever who molested you maybe were monsters when you were small. Maybe you were bullied by older kids at school, elementary school or high school. It's an immense feeling of helplessness, of being small, of being weak, and no one comes to help you. It's immense fear and grief and shame. And fear and grief and shame cannot be the basis of spirituality, of spiritual advance. You need to develop courage first. But fear and shame and guilt and so on, they often seem to change into the opposite, into pride and an imagined strength. Yeah? If you're weak and full of guilt and shame, you can imagine, in your mind, you can imagine that you're proud and strong and super intelligent and far ahead of others, in ways that others can't see, but you can see it. You can be like Professor Dumbledore or Gandalf, wise, wise beyond your years, and probably unrecognized and unacknowledged. You may not be a fighter, but you have empathy, intelligence, knowledge, maybe even occult knowledge that no one else has. Yoga schools, meditation schools, spiritual groups around gurus are full of these would-be Harry Potters and Frodos who want to become therapists and coaches and psychologists. They want to help others to get where they are. But where are they? They are often in a dreamland of imagination. On the Hawkins scale, there are often between 250 and 350. So yes, spiritually, they're a little ahead, because humanity, the average of humanity is around 200, 210, 215 maybe maximum. Most of those life coaches are between 250 and 290. That is why Eckhart Tolle says in his video, if you think you're ready to help and teach others, you're probably not. It could be there are psychologists and coaches who are ready, but most aren't. Because for most it's a trauma response. They're still working on their trauma. It's not their main reason, is not really to help others. It's just what they're used to, because they're still in the thick of it. Save yourself first. Like in the airplane, put on the mask, the oxygen mask on first yourself, and then you can think about helping others. I stopped recently making videos and thought about it and felt into it for quite some time. A, if it makes any sense, and B, if I might also be still subject to some helper complex here. The way to do it is to look for any identifications, to any need arising. Do I feel the need to make these videos? Do I feel that it will help others, that I will help others? Do I feel better after making a video and publishing it? Is something missing for me if I don't do it? So I delved into this question the last 2 months, and I found that in the past, yes. In the beginning, when I started making a channel, yes, there was still some helping urge left. Most enlightened people I know don't do any form of teaching or sharing. They don't feel the need to, urge to, so they don't. They just deal with everything themselves. And I've asked myself many years why people like Eckhart Tolle, for example, or Sri Aurobindo felt the need to share and teach. If there are no identifications left, no needs left, no deeply hidden traumata left, then why do anything? And that's exactly what happens on the path, usually between 400 and 600, that you don't feel the need to do anything anymore. There's no sense, no meaning in doing anything. And then at some point there can be the realization that we're all sitting in one boat, and that personal spiritual advancement is not enough. It needs to be one of society, of humanity. And it's very hard too, because usually, judging from the comments and questions that come, there are a lot of people who don't understand a word you're writing or saying. I mean, maybe it's even not so important what you're writing or saying, but the energy behind it, this frequency holding, as Eckhart Tolle calls it. Maybe that's the important thing. That there are some people who hold this frequency. Once they are able to do this without any identification, fear, shame, guilt, grief, and so on. Just because they can. And no one will pat you on the back and say thank you for it. Nor will you need them to thank you for it, or want them to thank you for it. You're just doing it because you can do it. Because you have the inner peace to do it. Because there's no inner dialogue left. There's no chattering of your mind left. Now and then a thought or an emotion will pop up. Some remnant of the past. It will come and it will go. And from this state of inner emptiness, of frequency holding without any identification, things may emerge that can be helpful to others. And if they're helpful to others, fine. If they're not helpful to others, it's also fine. Because there's no more expectation, no more compulsion, no more must, and no more mustn't. You're just going with the flow, and if the flow indicates do this, hold a speech, do a video, do a course, do a talk, then you can do it. And if not, then not. There is no punishment and reward left. There is no need left. No fear comes up when you don't do something. When you're not at the mercy of everyone and anyone anymore. When there's no impulse or reaction anymore of fight, flight, freeze or fawn. When you don't give a damn anymore what other people think about you. So thank you to my Patreons. I am available on Patreon and on email. Thank you for watching. Thank you for liking and subscribing and joining me on Patreon. And see you soon.